Welcome to the ACC Panic Room alongside Lauren Brownlow. I'm Joe Ovies, and it's Overreaction season. Capital S, capital Z, capital N. You want to overreact to the NCAA tournament, Brownlow, or do you want to overreact to transfers?
Um, Maybe transfers, just
Okay.
because like I actually think I understand the reaction more from a logical brain point of view, even if I don't always agree with it, if that makes sense. Like I understand why when an unexpected transfer happens, a
Okay.
reaction is immediate panic,
Okay.
whereas I don't always understand the NCAA, this conference is X because Y happened reactions.
Hey, I'm with you. I'm with you on that one. All right, so let's start with Walker Kessler. He announced yesterday on Twitter that he was going to enter the transfer portal away from North Carolina. And this could be taken any number of ways. There is the logical and sensible way of looking at this. A pandemic year that added a lot of weird variables to a season, including a not so normal life on campus, in combination with the NCAA rule changes that allow for one-time exemptions, or the expectation that they're going to allow these things, will create a free agency of sorts within the NCAA basketball structure. Which, by the way, for the record, I'm okay with. I mean, if a player wants to better their situation, I got zero issues with that. In the same way that assistant coaches and coaches better their situations all the time. So it would make sense that as the rules continue to shift and kids' priorities become more focused on what can better their chances of getting to the NBA or whatever goals they have, it was inevitable, Lauren, that North Carolina would eventually start getting hit with more transfers than not. I mean, it's really a credit to Roy Williams and UNC
Yeah.
over the last 20 plus years where you can count on your hands how many times they've had transfers.
Well, and the thing is too, like, and I think this is why it throws Carolina fans a little bit off, is because the other transfers, even the limited number they had, made sense, right? Like, I can't think of a transfer they had that you go, what?
Yeah,
Why? This
yeah.
is the first one that they've ever had that's a little bit of a what? Why? I mean,
And that's look at it that's how I would
yeah.
look at it. Like, hey man, it was bound to happen. I mean, we had this incredible run. I'm not going to sweat it. I mean, look at the track record more than anything else, rather than just one.
And considering the fact that, a lot of UNC people I know that were in the know were sort of alluding to transfers starting to happen, and the fact that he announced this like so soon after the season, that would
Yeah,
seem to indicate to me that this was probably going to happen regardless of how the season ended, or who's going pro or who's not for North Carolina. That was the only puzzling part to me, though, right? Is because you see in some draft boards, Dayron Sharp I saw was like potentially like late lottery, which again, and I'm not, look, no offense to Dayron Sharp, who I love. I love his game. I think he's
hmm
great. I was surprised because to me, I didn't know that the NBA was playing like that still, but okay. I thought they were like three pointers and defense on the
yeah,
perimeter and like stretch
yeah.
fives and I love Dayron, but he's not at the point yet where I would, you would want him to make much more than a layup. But you know what? He's super athletic. I'm sure they think he's got a lot of upside. I get all that stuff. So that's probably what it is. But either way, like if Dayron Sharp had left or if Baycott had left, I mean, he was going to be the centerpiece of that offense. I've seen some reporting that he wanted to be like a stretch five. I didn't really see any indication that he wasn't going to be able to do that. Like he barely played. So it was all very odd to me. And I was confused. But you know what? Like you said, pandemic year, who knows? He himself had a very unhappy year. Like he just
Yeah, I
did.
mean, he was quarantined at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
You also get in a put, people point out, well, he didn't play. Look at his minutes and everything else. I'm like, well, who is he going to play
Well,
over?
and
I
the
mean,
other
you
thing
can't.
is, right.
On one hand, I can't sit here and look at all the talk about how the best lineup for North Carolina includes Armando Bacot and Dayron Sharp to the expense of Garrison Brooks, right?
Yeah.
So what's Kessler supposed to do in that situation? What's Roy Williams supposed to do in that situation? And if you want to point to his late season progression, okay, but how much of that was an anomaly and how much of that was actual growth? I don't know. Because
Well,
the,
and the
the
thing
second
is,
the second half
right.
against Florida State was a huge surprise. The
Yeah.
Notre Dame game where he almost had a triple double was a fluke, in my opinion, given the way that game played. So I don't get too wrapped up in this.
If he had been the centerpiece of their offense all season, could things have turned out differently for him? Sure. But we also saw him at the beginning of the season, and he himself will admit how far behind he was.
Yeah.
And I mean, he would get out there, and it just he wasn't quite ready for college basketball just yet. And he, to his credit, he kept at it. He kept working. He got better.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would say it was a fluke, because I do think he's that type of player. And it reminds me in some ways of some of Carolina's bigs who, they didn't do much their freshman years or early on, and all of a sudden, they had a few big games late, and you're like, wow, okay, I didn't know this guy had that.
But the thing is, this gets back to the lesson that we learned about this particular North Carolina team. Why are we trying to take anything from one game to the next?
Well, there is that.
I mean,
but
there was a consistency within this North Carolina team where I'm not going to get to. I think, and I fell for it. I will admit that at the end of the season, I started to be like, oh, okay, here we go, North Carolina, and then we saw what happened against Wisconsin. So I'm not necessarily buying it. I'm not buying it.
The real concern isn't just Kessler necessarily. It's that the reports are that there will be more in some form or fashion.
Can we get to that? Can we get to that? Because this is also bothering me too. All right. I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, because you have a better handle on this than I do. But I feel like for the last 5 years or so, or since they won the championship in 2017, there has been this, every Tar Heel fan's been waiting for the wheels to fall off. Like, oh my, Roy's going to retire now. Our system has been passed by. What North Carolina does in college, the system is antiquated. It doesn't get people ready for the NBA. That's what we're missing, recruits and everything else. This is like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We've been dealing with this for the last 5 years. People have been waiting for this. And that's why we saw what we saw with Roy kissing the floor, people freaking out. This is it! Or how we talked about it on Friday night with Roy Williams being super emotional. Even you kind of got into that a little bit. Oh my goodness, what's going on? It's happening! It's happening! It's like you've been wanting this to happen, and you're looking for any little indication to see, like, it's time. Am I wrong here?
Well, I don't know if wanting would be the word that I would use to describe at least the Carolina fan feeling. I think there's just more of like, I mean, when you have a season like last season for them, that probably opens up a lot of doors that you didn't think were openable, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because it's one thing for you to not defend a national title. It's another thing for you to lose to a hot shooting Auburn team or whatever in 2019. It's another thing to do what happened in 2020. Mm-hmm. And yes, a lot of bad luck went into that season and everything else. But I think it's tough for people, because you saw even halfway through the season, when it was clear this wasn't the case, that people were like, oh, this is 2020 all over again. And you're like, no, it's not. But I think that when that sort of thing happens, and you think a thing that can't happen does happen to your program in that way, I think that leads to a lot of angst. Now, that's a separate conversation than, like, say, the Roy Williams UNC fan relationship, which has always been a little bit more tenuous. But I do think that plays into it some. You get it, you win a national title in 2017, you think it's all good. Then you get blown out the next 2 years in the tournament. Then you go do what you did last year. Then there's no tournament. There's no tournament. Then you go back to the tournament this year and get blown out again. Yeah. I can see why there's this feeling of like, wait, this doesn't happen to us. You know what I mean? In terms of being a North Carolina fan, I think that there is that sentiment. There's like, this is not supposed to happen to us.
Yeah. I guess that's a byproduct of convincing yourself you're special when nobody's special, which is always my MO. Although the way you just kind of laid it out there, Lauren, from 2017 in the last couple of years. I mean,
think about it.
If you put a Virginia jersey on North Carolina, I guess we should question whether or not Roy Williams is even a good coach.
Right.
Whether his system actually works. Because I get that they won a title and all, but look at the other results where they don't win the title, right? So clearly things just aren't working out for North Carolina and Roy Williams. I'm being sarcastic here as we transition to other things, because there was an element of that, and we do this every year in the NCAA tournament. We look at NCAA tournament results and we try to extract deeper meaning from that, as though what happens in the NCAA tournament, which is a historical crapshoot, somehow diminishes or invalidates what we typically see in the regular season. And in this case of Virginia, look, Matt Jones, Kentucky Sports Radio, doesn't really need my attention. The guy's popular enough. But he did the classic thing that sports talk radio people do. I know it because I am one. I know it won't see it. It's I'm just thinking out loud here. No, you're using that to kind of couch what you probably think, but you realize how ridiculous it sounds, but you still want to put it out there. So you do I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm just saying. And what he's saying is based on the national title being sandwiched between losing to a 16 for the first time that's ever happened in the NCAA tournament, which is a separate conversation altogether because I'm shocked it didn't happen before. And then the results this year, as though it invalidates what happened in their national championship run. I don't know why people want to do this. I don't know why this is so people are so desperate to do this to Virginia specifically, as though they've been proven wrong with the national championship. So they're looking for other reasons to kind of invalidate it. But it's a very odd thing that people want to do with Virginia that they wouldn't do to other programs.
Yeah. And that's the thing with other programs. What we do when a team loses in the NCAA tournament is we look at, okay, is there a recruiting issue? Is there a coaching issue? Is there some, you know what I mean? Something along those lines. Like, is there something about this particular coach, or are they not recruiting the right guys, or whatever it is, right? That's what we do. We look, or did they have an important injury? We look at all of these important bits of context. Do they not match up well with X particular style, right? Yeah. We are capable of finding nuance seemingly, relatively speaking, in like for everybody else except for this particular style. Here's the thing. It is perfectly okay for you to not like the style of play. I have no issue with that. That's cool. What you want to like. That's cool. It's almost like this weird thing where people seem to think that like, if they can prove to Tony Bennett that this will not win him games in March when he's already won a title with it, that he'll stop it, I guess. And I don't know, like, just don't watch it. You don't have to watch Virginia play basketball. You know, like,
well, it also tells me you don't really watch, because if you still have that opinion about it, also again, if you have that opinion about this particular Virginia squad where they actually open things up, it just tells me you haven't watched.
It's like this thing where you want the thing that you don't like to also be wrong. Yeah. You know, and it's like, no, there's actually some of the slowest teams in the country are actually still alive in this tournament right now.
Well, okay. I'm glad you brought that up, because we talk about style. I'll say one last thing about Virginia when we transition to the other team that I'm talking about, because it's a good transition point. To me, with Virginia, they've gotten to a point in the ACC in the regular season where they're a top-tier team, right? And it almost becomes this thing where it's like, well, you've been mean to my team when they have early exits, so I want you to be mean to them. Right, it's their turn for you to be mean to them.
But it's
a very childish way of looking at things. But we are dealing with sports, and people end up being childish about this kind of stuff. So, because I've alluded to, Tony Bennett gets treated differently now because of the success, and that what we saw with ACC Coach of the Year. In any other season leading up to this point, Tony Bennett probably ends up being the ACC Coach of the Year. But now he's reached that Roy Williams, Mike Krzyzewski mode, and if he gets to that point, well, now we have to bash him if they have early exits.
But by the way, like, here's the thing about this, like, this sort of talk about Virginia too. Mm-hmm. You can pick other years to do this. They may do this again. They probably will, in all likelihood.
True.
Why you choose to do this during a year when we're playing in a pandemic and they basically barely even got to play, period, didn't even practice until the Thursday before their game against a very good team that everyone loved coming into this tournament, like, that just shows me you're being kind of intentionally disingenuous at this point. Like, why are you not, like, that's kind of important context. I don't know.
Like I said, I can identify when sports talk radio people are doing sports talk radio things.
No, you know what? Shout out to my friend Mark Ennis, right? Because I was talking to him before this about this on my podcast, and he was like, so he's like, they're totally going to do this if Virginia loses. I was like, I don't know, man. Like, they barely even played in this game. Like, they barely played this week in practice. They shouldn't even be ready. You know what? Maybe Tony Bennett just shouldn't have bothered to take his team at all because of COVID and said they couldn't play, because that would have made these people happier so that they could, oh, well, Virginia can't play, then they can't have their hot takes. You know what I mean? It's just so silly.
Well, what's funny is this gets back to the particular style thing. Well, the style doesn't work in the NCAA tournament. Well, what would you rather have? Would you rather be Syracuse in the regular season, or would you rather be Virginia? Because let's look at Syracuse, right? We all sit here and we bash Syracuse during the regular season. They don't run an offense. The zone is well, have they?
Yes.
So here's the thing. This is the third time in the last 5 NCAA tournaments where they've gone from a double-digit seed to the Sweet 16, right? And it's kind of come like a joke, but you're trying to figure out, okay, well, why does this happen? Well,
There is something, I know.
The reason why it happens is actually pretty simple to figure out.
Yeah,
The zone in the course of the regular season in the ACC, when you see it enough times, it's like the old Georgia Tech triple option stuff, right? With Paul.
Well, yes.
Like it's kind of a similar thing, right?
That plays in, but I do also think that they are legitimately playing it better right now, and that started like in March-ish. But yes, I agree.
Okay, which also gets to the way Syracuse and the zone and all that stuff start to figure themselves out, especially offensively, right? So there is an element to what you're saying, but ultimately the zone that Syracuse runs, as we know, is not a typical zone. Okay, people just chalk it up to a 2-3 zone when it's not exactly that simple, right?
Yep.
So when you see it in the ACC consistently year in, year out, your coaching peers know how to match up against you and try to exploit it. I'm not saying it's easy to beat Syracuse all the time. I'm simply saying that ACC coaches know what the hell they have to do. When you're a team in the NCAA tournament who does not see Syracuse ever, and you've never seen that zone before, and maybe you practice against the zone, you don't practice against that zone, and we see these results in the last couple of years. It becomes a pain in the ass. So in a weird sort of way, it's like, so do we credit Jim Boeheim more? So I don't know. It's just kind of funny that
I think that
they take so much in the NCAA tournament.
Right. I think it's a combination of all of that, right? Because sometimes Syracuse isn't playing that well coming into this portion of the season, but Buddy Boeheim had a really rough start to the season with COVID. He's playing amazing right now. Joe Girard, he had a rough first 4 months of the season, and he looks great now.
To his credit, there's been a lot of talk about putting Richmond instead of him, and they've played well with Richmond in the lineup over Girard. But Girard's looked good in this.
What did the anonymous coach say, that they were lunchtime players, something like that? Buddy and Girard were like great lunchtime players, and Jim Boeheim was like, "Yeah, that's hell of a lunchtime," or something like that. It's like, that's fair. You just call them white players, dude. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Just say white.
Do that.
That's what you mean.
Do that. Yeah, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. Anyway, so Virginia's doing that thing again, and it confounds people. But I don't know. It's just funny to me when you do this long enough. There are certain coaches that we like and certain coaches that we don't like, and we're willing to give certain coaches a pass for their NCAA tournament success or lack of success. I'm
gonna write about this because it's driving me nuts. Because it's also driving me nuts with conferences. Yeah. Like the Pac-12 didn't suddenly have an amazing year because their teams are playing well right now. Sometimes that's just how this thing works, man. Like sometimes your teams are just playing well this time of year, sometimes they're not. But the Big Ten isn't having a bad tournament because it's a meat grinder. Like that's just not the way it works.
Meanwhile, with the ACC, they got a lot of teams, but even you and I were sitting here going, really? The
ACC
going to
go far?
And we all knew that. That's the funny thing about the ACC. The ACC is the best position possible because people who actually watch the conferences here and they see only two teams standing, we're all going, that sounds about right.
That's the two teams I probably thought would be, honestly.
Florida State with their dudes and Leonard Hamilton. Yeah, that sounds about right in the Sweet 16, as we just kind of discussed with Syracuse. Yeah, double-digit seed. They're doing that thing again. Okay, that sounds about right. Everybody else being out of the ACC, we're like,
not a surprise.
Yeah. Not a surprise.
Especially with Virginia's situation being what it was. I was like, they're done. I mean, the highest seed the ACC got is a 4. Mm-hmm. And no one necessarily thinks that that's bad. So, for the ACC to have 2 teams left, great. There's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? They didn't have the best year, but, they still had teams that were solid. They didn't have anybody amazing, but they had some solid teams. And they had some bad ones. But they had some solid ones, too. They just didn't have any elite teams. That's the way it's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, that it is what it is. And the Big Ten had some really good teams that had bad days. That doesn't mean that they're not good anymore. I mean, do I think that the Big Ten narrative led to some seeding mistakes? Yeah, I do. I think over relying on conferences in general, look at Loyola. Loyola was better than an 8 seed all year. That's not, you know what I mean? Were they 8 or 9? I don't remember. They were 8, right? And Georgia Tech was the 9?
Yeah.
Georgia Tech had no business even being the 9. That was still a way too tough game for Illinois in round 2, regardless. Illinois gets screwed because everyone's still Georgia Tech comes out of the ACC. Well, who have they really beaten? They're going to be a 9. And then, you got Loyola, they're coming out of the Missouri Valley. Well, they must not be very good in spite of their record and great metrics. 8 seed for you. We don't need to be doing this. Sometimes you can look at teams and go, okay, actually this team is good, and that team should not have been an 8 anyway. Loyola shouldn't have. So again, it's just there's a lot of things that go into it beyond just a team is good or a league is good. There are different teams in each league, and they do different things. It's not hard. I
Weird.
it's insane to me. Like,
That's gonna
I
wrap it
don't
up
know
for
why
this
we do
edition. That's gonna wrap it up for this edition of the ACC Panic Room. Although I have a feeling we'll do more. Shout out to Will Brinson at CBSSports.com. We might have to just do an emergency panic room if we get more transfers from UNC.
Well, and here's the thing too, because I saw a lot of like, I'll put it this way before we leave.
Yeah.
One of our favorite words, concern trolling from other fan bases.
Ah, yes, I love that.
And I do think everybody's going to have a transfer, at least
Yes.
one. And I will be stunned if there's not more.
College basketball. That's what happens.
Well, and especially with the transfer rule being what it is,
Yes.
and the ACC taking out its restrictions too, this is going to be a crazy offseason for all of you. Just because UNC got it started first doesn't mean that you should probably be not dancing on there, you know what I mean? But like, just easy. I think State's probably in the best position to stay relatively intact, but that's just a guess on my part. I have no idea.
We have no idea.
No idea.
There's always a surprise.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I have a feeling we'll be doing another panic room at the end of the week to talk about all the transfers. We'll see you then.